Okay, terrible code open, but we missed out on a little bit of news. We're going to be playing a lot of game and catch up today. A lot of big things to work on. Let's get into it.
I need all the wins, yeah. Ain't no L's, I gotta get a no call and quits, yeah. Gotta keep on moving no matter how hard.
Here comes Danny Tuccizola, back to Baker, Baker with the fin. Kurt Baker in for DC, and this may well do it old glory with the try. The New Zealand Sevens legend, Kurt Baker with the cherry on top.
Can you believe it?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the On the Line Rugby Podcast, a show brought to you by the Believe Sports Network. I'm your host, Mike Nagaishi, and welcome back. You know, we have a lot of things to really catch up on, a lot of big news, surprisingly, in the weeks leading up to kickoff, so I'm really impressed. Really big things to talk about internationally and domestically, so we're going to start off with the international and then work our way back to the American shorelines. Let's get with it. All right. I think our first topic cannot be overmissed. It's going to be Rugby Australia appointing Joe Schmidt as the future Wallabies head coach. I'm kind of a little mixed on it. I do share a lot of what my homie, the Black Jersey, discussed in his video. So for all those who haven't watched it, you might hear a little bit more of the same. For those who haven't watched it, go watch it, come back. A little bit different perspectives here and there. But here we go. In terms of like parity, I feel like this is a good idea because you're facing off against your apprentice in Andy Farrell for the Lions series next year, which I hopefully will be attending. Cross my fingers. I did not make the package time, but we ball. And you know, I personally was kind of surprised at this. I really thought they would have went for like a maybe try to pull a Gregor Townsend, you know, maybe get Wayne Smith and friends, anybody else, just because Joe Schmidt, while he is a legendary coach, you know, he set a lot of records in Ireland. He did well in New Zealand. Obviously, as the Blues attack coach, they really evolved physically, mentally, and schematically throughout their scheme. Mark Talea's emergence was really, I think, because of what the work that they put in. Obviously, with his work with the All Blacks, his needs not be overstated. He got them to a final. I really didn't think they would get that far this year, but surprisingly, they did. And I don't think they're going to do it again without Joe Schmidt. Unless Razor can magically, you know, conjure up Crusader magic out of thin air on test level and make it work. I think Razor's the best coach for the job, though. Not saying he's not worth it. As for like why I thought he wouldn't be head coach, it was simply just because of logistics. You know, when you look at Joe Schmidt's career, when he retired from Ireland, he couldn't get them over the hump. It's just Irish culture. Take it for what it is. From what the talk is, it was just about that he has a child who is disabled and he just needed time to take care of him back in home soil. Hence why he retired and became an assistant coach rather than a head coach. I honestly thought if you're going to go for the head coach, why didn't you just go for the Blues? A lot more guarantees. You know, while I do think that Vern Cotter is a good head coach, you know, he brings a lot of the Fijian mentality, which is what the Blues brand is. I definitely think that you should lean into what you grew with, and really, Joe Schmidt should have been the head coach. I think Joe Schmidt did get a little bit of the Brinch truck, you know, a little bit of that NIL money for all my American fans to come back. And, you know, Rugby Australia knew that they had to get this right and try to get someone else with some credibility who would bring back that. I'm not going to say winning yet, but I will say a little bit of that positivity back to, in my opinion, personally, one of the more negative markets in media for rugby around the world next to, I think, England. I think that's of the really ones that I've experienced so far. Yeah, it's just you're asking him to do a lot in the next year. You know, I'm pretty well assured at this rate that they're going to want him to probably win the Lions test or at least draw at that rate. And that to me is going to be a little hard. And this is where I agree with the Black Jersey on that. Is just like with the talent pool you got. Let's see. You got Angus Bell, one of the best props, in my opinion, in the world. You got Tate McDermott, who's one of the better nines out there. Carter Gordon, if you develop him well, he could be like, I'm not going to say top 10, maybe top 15 in the world. You had Mark Nwani in Tawase. He's gone now. Let's see. Harry Wilson. You kind of got Max Jorgensen and Ben Donaldson. I don't know for how long, though. You don't have a lot. Oh, and you got Nella Tupou. That's not a lot of raw talent that you can work with that has transcended over the years. Guys like James Slipper, Alan Alatoa will not be there because of their age when it matters most. I think they're going to start getting phased out. I'm surprised, at least in Slipper's sense, that he hasn't really retired. You already lost Marie Corbett. You're probably going to lose Samu Karevi. It doesn't leave a lot to be desired. I think you're going to have to pull a lot of what Eddie Jones tried to do and get the new blood in and blooded as fast as possible. You're going to see a lot of tanking, at least in quality, in my personal opinion, with Rugby Australian rugby, not only in the provincial level, but also in the test level. I think that the All Blacks with Razor are probably going to end up smoking them just for lack of experience and confidence. You had a Noah Lolesio who probably wouldn't even make it in a goal kicking competition with a goat, and his confidence is trashed. Carter Gordon's confidence probably trashed. You have not a lot of ample quality players to work with, and you're going to need to dig deep in the Rolodex of international talent to really try to get. You're going to have to try to get those Mac Hansons, those all the players playing in France back, and that's going to be a hard ask to do from a Rugby Australia who is not only strapped for cash but also strapped for butts and seats who are going to watch it. Because even if you do bring them back, you're not going to make the money, at least in the short term, with the returns you're going to get. In terms of could Schmidt right the ship, absolutely. I thought the same with Eddie Jones. Obviously that didn't go as well as I'd hoped. I think they expect a magical quick turnaround, and you're not going to get it. You're going to have to expect a slow burn. I think we just have to accept that Rugby Australia is probably going to be in the tier 2 and 3 conversations with the USA, unfortunately, while they do have better talent than us, just because of the situations that they're at. For you to already be bankrupt, asking for a bailout for a majority of your provincial competition, you just took a massive loan out. Now you got to do another one if you want to bail out the Rebels from collapsing. P.S. I really don't think that's going to happen. Their price are going to go down, unfortunately. But being that as it may, you have a lot more bases to cover than you do to get your talent in. And, starts at grassroots levels. I've said it all once. I've said it twice. I'll say it again. If the NRL and the AFL are beating you in the schools, they're beating you in the clubs, and they're beating you in audience retention, you are going to lose no matter what. Even in socials, you're going to lose. And when they make it more approachable, that's where you lose. And hence why you're seeing a lackluster product. But, yet to be seen. Hopefully Schmidt, can turn it all around. Obviously a quality head coach. I would put him in at least top 10 of all time. From what I've watched, he's one of the best coaches ever. I know his record before that speaks to itself. And, I do have a question for culture clash in the locker room, just because on top of everything I've just mentioned, just because, when you look at the way and the things that Schmidt does bring to the table, he brings a quick attack on the wing, heavy offload mentality with a lot of scheme. And you need long developing plays, which is what Johnny Sexton thrived on throughout his entire career. It's what a lot of Irish players based off of slow burn, bang it out, everyone do your job, and then hit some magical play down the line and you're going to score. And I don't think Australia's built for that. Obviously Australia's brand of rugby is more flat at the game line, push offloads, and move on the field that way. And while Schmidt can do that, as we've seen with the Blues, it's not exactly, what I would consider modern fast moving rugby, which is what Australia is kind of leaning towards. Well, obviously New Zealand is, it's going to be an interesting adjustment for him and the locker room to kind of take in what he's doing, not only as a legend of the game, but as a schematic to just slow the game down to get to where you want to be. And that could be an interesting storyline to see throughout the year. But hopefully it's not an Eddie Jones thing, but you need a lot more than Joe Schmidt to right this ship, Rugby Australia. And I think that's going to show anytime now. Best believe. We're going to watch out for that. I think another story that we can't also miss and not talk about is the amount of bolters that we're having going into, whether it's the NFL, soccer. I've seen a guy do lacrosse for whatever reason. But I think two of the biggest names you have to talk about is Harry Mallender and Louis Rees-Zammit. For all those who know, essentially he's in my personal opinion, the Will Jordan of the North. He has that sneaky fast speed. He has a glide with him. He's an automatic try scorer. In his last 2 years that he's had, first 2 years he was blowing up tries not only for Gloucester but for Wales. Probably should have won World Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year at one point, but then he kind of fell off in form, whether it's due to injury or lack of confidence. Obviously Wales is having their issues with financials, with the player strike, with having to drop the old blood, a lot of the guys that helped teach LRZ in the game, and he probably just felt underappreciated, and I don't blame him. The Northern Hemisphere rugby has been kind of on a downfall for a little bit over the last couple of years. We've seen it in the Premiership, we've seen it in the Pro 14 having to move to bring the South Africans to the URC. Top 14 is kind of having a resurgence. Pro D is okay, but there's a lot of things that you need to fix on the financial level outside of the Jay-Z collab that needs to be done up north as well. And I think that's just what happened. You have to appreciate your talented players. He's 22 years old, has a lot of gas left in the tank. He is moving at least to the NFL along with Harry Mallender. I believe Harry Mallender is probably going to move to kicker. As for Louis Rees-Zammit, I probably could see him as a easy, pitch and catch returner. I see him doing workouts as a wide receiver. I'm not saying the guy can't catch, but his high ball skill probably needs some work on to prove to athletes that he can high point the ball at a high level. He definitely was going to need to learn how to take a hit, because not only is he skinny, but let's face it, hits in the NFL are different from rugby. They're always going to be, they're a little bit high. Spearing is going to happen. And I don't think his body is going to be ready for that Ray Lewis level hit to the jaw that he's going to end up having to take on a day in and day out basis. The NFL is just, I'm not going to say more physical, but more debilitating on the body than a rugby match would, a rugby season period. And then when you look outside of that, how much of that mileage of just running on the wing is going to translate? You're not going to see him being for all my American fans, like a Marquise Goodwin or a Ted Ginn, where he just blows past the corner, runs down the field for 4 verts and just runs a 9 route, catches the ball, runs a sail route down the corner like Stephon Diggs. You're not going to see that. His route running looks like an intramural football player coming in, and it shows. But not gonna knock the guy on his dream. But there's definitely better ways to do it. I thought that of a comp for a guy that transferred over, you're not gonna be like that Jordan Mailata type who's just gonna come in, slot in, and ball. I could foresee him being a low end like Jared Hayne type, where he comes in preseason and tries to work it out. Jared Hayne did a lot of special teams. He tried to play running back. For whatever reason, it didn't work. I thought Hayne would have been better of a translator than Rees-Zammit, but we'll see. A lot of people are kind of trying to pencil him in with the Lions. That'll be an interesting pick. I don't think he could really take Dan Campbell's abuse, but love the boy. Sad to see him lose today. This is coming right after they just choked the game to the 49ers. I'm not watching that Super Bowl anymore, but being that as it may, it's hard to see how he'll translate. As for Harry Mallender, though, did not watch a lot of his tape in the last week. Probably should have, but looking at what I did see, limited wise, that I was able to get a hands on. He's trying to go for kicker or punter. The guy has a good leg. He ran for England's U23, and he can make those banana kicks. He can do all of that. Kind of echoes that Dan Carter shift when he was I'm not going to say courted, but I guess speed dated with the Pats in the mid 2000s about joining Tom Brady on a Super Bowl run. That would have been interesting to see him join that team with kind of the part of Vinatieri, half foot out and half foot out. And then, all the guys like Hauschka and friends who tried to replace him, and ended up being Steven Gostkowski, another guy from Europe. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes with that. For the boot, I saw that he had a decent amount of leg, a lot of explosiveness. I've yet to see him try to do a long kick, so that will remain to be seen until I can see it myself. But I think for him, it's a lot easier path for him to get in, obviously, just because you're a kicker. But also, you need to look at this as a two-handed sword. You're going for the bag. You're probably going to get it as a kicker. But as a kicker, you have to know in the NFL, they will can you for one missed field goal. I mean, they did that with Young Hui Koo. For all those who don't know, he used to be the kicker for the Chargers. He then missed like one in a game, got cut, and then got sent to the Chargers. The Falcons. And is now the most accurate kicker in the NFL and one of the longest, best legs next to Matt Prater out there. They're not going to hold you for long. It's a very expendable job. You're put in the prime time a lot. You will get canned if you're not doing good. If you go for punter, that'll be interesting to see. I'm sure he can drop kick a little bit, so that'll be an interesting little thing that he can do. But he could probably really miss. I think both him and Reese Emmett could miss being back in the code, and then might come back. We'll see what happens. Hopefully they make it. It would be nice to see more rugby players translate, but I think for me, the jury's still out on that. And then as we kind of move a little closer, since we already touched the NFL, let's move a little bit back to the East, and let's cover some interesting news out of World Rugby. I think that this is a little bit of tampering, but, we'll see. I think it was interesting that World Rugby joined up with the MLR and Rugby Pass to create Anthem Rugby Carolina for the MLR with immediate eligibility moving into next year. Just from a multitude of perspectives, obviously with them coming in, that brings the league back to two conferences, East and West, obviously, and that now kind of throws the schedule out the window. Obviously they haven't released the rosters really yet as for a whole team, but it's, well talked about that there was going to be mostly USA Hawk developmental players. They already have a stadium in mind, given that it's their old stadium. They have the facilities and probably the same staff is going to carry over, I'd assume. But looking at it, you're playing in a sub 10K stadium with no real roster news or proper web presence. A little worrisome. We'll go into that a little later. And obviously this is supposed to develop the USA Eagles, give them a better chance at moving on through the World Cup, given that the USA is going to be prominently featured, obviously, in 2031 and probably 2035. They're going to try to make 2027. I don't know if they'll make it. But it's an interesting technique. The same thing, not without World Rugby's help, was done with Georgia, Uruguay, I believe Brazil, and a couple other countries. Mixed success. Obviously we see Georgia and Uruguay doing great things. Georgia still, in my opinion, has the second or third best scrum on planet Earth. Uruguay is just a interesting tier 2 nation you have to watch, even with Chile, Portugal, Romania, but they're kind of just like a wild card. They're always going to be there, and it's like an interesting watch. Like for those who can't catch a Fiji game or a New Zealand game, just kind of searching the channels of that rate. I think this is where we get to that point where you need to kind of look at yes, there's pluses. You're adding in more development. You're kind of hoarding all the Eagles, I guess, into one squad, or at least all the developmental Eagles. Getting a little bit more continuity. And I think that fixes a lot of what Scott Lawrence couldn't do, which was identity of the team. When you have a bunch of guys, not only from around the world, like at AJ McGinty and friends, but just in here in domestics from all different types of schemes and levels of play, and you put them all together in one room. It's a little interesting to see how that will go, but to build that continuity is huge. But if you look at what else is there, there's a lot of downsides to this. For one, on league-wide association, it's time to stop expanding and reshuffling. Obviously this year we've had 2-3 teams dissolve. We've had a bunch of transparency issues to the point where every week there was a random PR message from our friendly neighborhood MLR team. Schedules were blown up, redone, no need for rosters, guys in the salary dispersal draft. Some of them weren't even signed to further contracts. We're still waiting on that. No one's talking about that, by the way. I think anyone else could also smell a little bit of tampering from World Rugby, just kind of push this a little forward simply because of how the league is doing and the new sponsors they're pulling out, with Globant. You got your, MLR rebrand going on, all that stuff. It's a little fishy, but we're not going to talk about that. La 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 la. I guess everyone's trying to put the Guardian article behind for obvious reasons. You're disincentivizing fans to really invest in your team. I'm sure a lot of people had travel plans to go to some cities. Maybe they wanted to see Toronto and the Sabercats play, or hell, I don't know, maybe New York versus Chicago. And now that plan is blown up, and now you have 3 different schedule changes, and you try to reschedule it for those whose teams didn't fold, and now you got to do it another time because of that. It's stupid. Like, you have no stability, and because of that, it's looking bad, not only as a PR light, but also as a fan light. And I think that's a very bad thing to have to deal with and to even start. They shouldn't have even done that. It has a lot of pros, but as you can see, a lot of cons, at least on the league-wide level. Also, on top of that, you're not really getting a lot of retention from that as a league, in my opinion, just because of the fact that, you're having a lot of guys play for different nations. You're having a Tom Franklin go back to New Zealand. You have a Sama Malolo, who was a shining star for the Legion, go back to Moana Pacifica to go play back for, I believe he plays for Samoa. You have a lot of guys moving. This isn't really gonna reinvent the wheel for America, and I think you need to realize that. I think this is why you're having a lot of tables of goodwill. We'll talk about one in a little bit, but it's just, I think this should have been done a lot earlier if you were going to do it, and you can't rewrite the ship and rewrite your history because of this. This could be a great thing, if you go the Uruguay Georgia route and just try to hoard everyone to one side. I believe they signed, one of their biggest things was they got Jake Turnbull from the Seawolves for like a high five and a bag of chips. That's a start, but that's not anything major. You need to do a lot more, and if not, it probably could be another Rugby LA. We'll see. Hey, Drew's still out. As for another thing that USMLR magically did, somehow, some way, it took them this long to organize a union. I was gonna I'll save a lot of this for my future discussion on this, but this was long overdue. In terms of player transparency for families, for fans, all that, you needed a person in not only the league office, but representing players on every team, on the staff, just to have better inclusion, transparency, better conditions on the field, fan experiences, family treatment. A lot of that could have been done years ago, but they chose not to do it, just to fast track it. And now it's biting them in the butt. And now you're just seeing it now. And I think finally recognize a league and a union that's been clamoring for support to the point where they had to put out a Guardian article to even get really noticed is pretty weak, that it took this long to get sorted out. I'm glad that it happened. It should have been done long ago. Another bad blunder by the league. But, hopefully it leads to better transparency, better financial incentives to keep guys playing in this league. I still consider this more of a mover and shaker type of minor league for the rest of the world. And, the quality of USA Rugby really shows. So a lot of work to do in that regard. A lot of things to really prove a lot of fans wrong. Not trying to be a little bit of a, negative Nancy, but if you look at it, there's not a lot to really gleam out of that shouldn't have been done already. As for another topic that should have been done already, there's a lot of things that I truly believe that World Rugby tried to push underneath the rug in terms of to get things off the ground, to help players out, whether it's insurance, we'll talk about that, unionization, just talked about it, we'll talk about it in a future time, and more of a younger approach to the game. But one of them that I really think needs to have been changed and should have been changed a long time ago is the better, I'm not going to say helmets, but caps and padding that should have been introduced long ago. Now, whether you like it or not, a lot of your players, favorite players, use at least body armor, at least that on both their arms and legs. You can't get around that. Maybe not a scrum cap. A lot of them do though. But you can't get around the body armor part. I think it's a necessary beast of playing such a physical game for the amount of like rounds you're playing it, not counting internationals or sevens or league for those of us who do play for clubs and crossover. It puts a lot of mileage in the body, and let's face it, what little amount of protection can really help a lot. In terms of how this should have started, obviously also long overdue, but 2019, after that World Cup, was supposed to be the trial and finish of a lot of experimental tech that's supposed to be joining the N Pro, for all those who don't know, involving the growth of innovation of padding, zones, and materials to be used. And I feel like they kind of scrapped that, or at least got, lost in the mail per se, or, stuck in paperwork essentially of, like resolutions to change. It was supposed to increase the padding, the amount of materials you could, derive from the development of that. All that could have been innovative, and years down the line, up to now, 4 years, which is a long time for development, to at least have some implementation outside of the N Pro. Unfortunately, they only, managed to green light the sandwiching, which is what the N Pro is made of. For all those who don't know, the N Pro is made from a bunch of French neurologists and English neurologists working together. And they created a scrum cap that, I'm not going to say decreases concussions, but helps reduce the linear and rotational forces done on impact from multiple points on the head with the current scrum cap technology that we have. Now, I'm not going to quote real millimeters per se of the law, but I believe it's something like 6 millimeters thick is the biggest you can go. And at one point you couldn't sandwich them. It had to be mostly small bubbles. And they managed to do it by basically cementing in sandwiching of different foams and not gels. I'm not going to say gels, but maybe PVE and other types of like malleable composite plastics into the pods of the scrum cap to allow for different levels of ventilation, cooling, and obviously impact retention that still maintains its shape after impact. That I think has changed the game. Obviously, it won't eliminate the problem of concussions. It won't eliminate the amount of bodily injuries, but it helps curb a lot of things outside of just curing cauliflower ear. I myself personally have seen guys run into each other full speed, literally bang each other square on the Canterbury logo on their heads, and not going to say they didn't get concussed, but it could have been a lot worse based off of that. And those are just Joe Blow Canterbury scrum caps that even I have. So like things like that needed to have been innovated. I'm not saying you have to go full NFL and go full plastic hard shell, composite headgear, full shoulder pads. That's obviously going to lead to a lot of bodily injury because people get more confident, but there's a lot more innovation that you could do within those limitations or an expanded of those limitations that could change things. It obviously decreases a lot of soft tissue inflammation, and I think accidental knocks to the body, with little added protection and a little bit extra zones. We've seen a large reduction of just in body armor alone. Now, I have a pretty thick body armor in terms of the amount of plates I have. Obviously, it reduces a little bit of mobility, but whatever. But as you go, I think mine says like 37 plates. But as you look down the line up to this year, you maybe have you have your shoulders, you obviously have your middle chest, middle back, and that's it. You don't have your sternum protection. A lot of the ones don't have your back or your sides. Kind of lame. They don't even have wraparounds on the plates. They were just on the shoulder pauldron. That's it. I personally like mine, although I kind of consider it somewhat of a suit of armor because it covers all those zones. It helps a lot. Whether or not, you can innovate on that is yet to be seen, obviously, but it should be, I think, strongly encouraged, not mandated, but strongly encouraged that World Rugby try to get these out there, obviously for more protection purposes, but also better awareness to just not think that you're Superman out there and not have to be an Iron Man. That would help a lot. Obviously, the World Rugby design specs would need to change, but I think it would help a lot. You could easily lean on the gel and TPE lattice type MIPS structures. For all those who know biking and snowboarding, you all know who MIPS is, or not who it is, but what it is. For all those who don't, it's essentially a system where your head is in a static, you could say helmet or cap, for those bikers or snowboarders, it would be a helmet. And what it does essentially is wherever it's hit, it softly deforms and creates a freely moving plate almost. So it allows the rotational force to then be redirected. So it's not on your head, and your basically the head part with all the padding that protects you and molds to your head would then move around that. Obviously, again, doesn't clear concussions, but it helps a lot. Or you can look at what Visis did with their Ultim scrum caps that were supposed to have an Ultim R description, which some of us did help test and didn't make it past prototyping stage for whatever reason. Gel type lattices, so you can boom and you can compress, crackle, lateral, vertical, and still retain their shape. Just like a car, it's perfect. Helps out a lot. You see it a lot with other sports. Even soccer has gotten it down. Flag football has gotten down. If flag sports can get it, come on. Why can't tackle sports? I think it should be long overdue in that regard. Obviously, a lot of the knocks in our sport are purely accidental or the result of a fall post-contact, whether it's dumping or forming a ruck. Things happen. Sometimes a guy falls, trips in a little bit into contact, slips up, boom, concussion. But, a lot of those rotational forces are reduced by helping out with this. I feel like this should be a no-brainer. I definitely think that a lot needs to be done in that case. It's not for lack of development, obviously, but, I'm sure it's just the amount of paperwork and the amount of oversight that World Rugby tries to have. This is where I think that it really is an old man's game, and we'll talk about that at a later date. But there's a lot of things that need to, I think, be a little bit more progressive, and I think this is one of them. Would be nice. I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime, but hey, there's hope. But that's going to be it for me today on this segment. Thank you all for joining in, and I'll see you next time. Peace.